The year is 1079, and France is about to undergo one of the biggest economic shifts so far in human history. The nation would adopt a new system that would guarantee wealth, prosperity, and an extremely high quality of life. I am, of course, talking about feudalism.
We're an anarcho-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week.
Yes.
France had been one of the most populated regions in Europe, but 90% of that population was peasantry. These peasants could be classed into two types: unfree, meaning that they were tied to a certain plot of land that could be included in purchases, and free, which was the same as being unfree, except you could also join the army and die. Likewise, there was also gradations of nobility. At the top of the hierarchy was King Philip I. The king had the power to give land titles to certain lesser nobles, known as lords. However, as the 11th century came to a close, an increasing number of lords caused land divisions to become smaller and smaller. This would eventually lead to manorialism, where peasants would become attached not only to a plot of land, but also a general estate that they would work. Because of this, the distinction between free and unfree peasantry would erode away. While nobles insisted that now everyone was a free peasant, the poorer classes had actually lost a substantial amount of their human freedoms compared to previous centuries. This was the era of serfdom. Due to increased trade and diplomacy in the 11th century, France also became a commercial capital. Cities quickly grew in size and infrastructure, leading to the chartering of France's first colleges, namely the University of Paris. In part because of this new emphasis on an educated class, French literature boomed. Outside of liturgical and scholarly texts written in Latin, colloquial literature would be written in the common French dialect of the day. Because of this, the French language began to circulate as an export among foreign merchants. Eventually, French would become the universal language of a much more connected world, originating the term lingua franca.
Abelard was born in 1079 to a family of the lower gentry in northwest France near the city of Nantes. His early education centered around classical authors like Ovid, Virgil, and Juvenal, whose ideas greatly influenced his later works. After abandoning his inheritance to study philosophy, he traveled to the Loire region to become a student of Rosslin of Compiègne, after which he moved to Paris to study under William of Champeaux. After a failed career as a lecturer, in 1113 Abelard decided to commit his life to the study of Christian doctrine, where he then became a scholar in residence at Notre Dame and learned under the tutelage of Anselm of Laon. It was at this time that Abelard began his notorious affair with Eloise that has inspired various literary works such as Alexander Pope's 1717 poem Eloise to Abelard and Jean-Jacques Rousseau's La Nouvelle Eloise. After Eloise's father Fulbert discovered the affair and the two refused to marry after she had become pregnant, he sent a gang to break into Abelard's residence and castrate him in retaliation. Despite this violent breach of their love, the two would remain in contact throughout their lives and were ultimately buried together at the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris. Abelard then became a Benedictine monk at Saint Denis, where he wrote his Theologia Summi Boni that was condemned by a council at Soissons and burned. After a brief exile to the countryside where he ran a priori school dedicated to lectures on the Holy Trinity, he became abbot of St. Gildas and traveled back to Paris, where he began his famous debates with his former teacher, William of Champeaux. William ultimately accused Abelard of several heresies that led to a council at Sens and ended in his excommunication by Pope Innocent II, which was ultimately overturned with the aid of Peter the Venerable, with whom he spent the rest of his life before passing away in 1142.
Abelard had several large philosophical contributions in the 12th century. Two of his most significant works, Logic and Dialectic, developed logical theories still relevant today in propositional logic, distinctions between force and content, and a theory of entailment or logical consequentialism. Abelard also made important contributions to metaphysics and the philosophy of language, analyzing how meaning is constructed through linguistic structures. He is widely accredited as the founder of conceptualism, the view that universals, such as redness, exist only as mental constructs rather than independent realities.
Abelard had a lot of major contributions to the world of ethics in philosophy. One of his big contributions was a work named Ethics, otherwise known as Know Yourself, which argued that the intention behind an individual's actions determines if their decision is morally correct or incorrect. Abelard argued that a person can only sin if they think that their action is against what they believe is required of them by God. For example, if a person does a bad deed, Abelard argues that as long as the individual acted with the belief that they are doing God's will, their deed is not immoral, making their sinful action unintentional and without blame to the individual. With this, he distinguishes the difference between acting willingly and unintentionally.
Conclusion. Peter Abelard's life was full of personal hardship and philosophical contributions. His works in philosophy, logic, and ethics have had a lasting impact, influencing medieval and modern thought.